Hello, folks. This is Mike Newmeyer again, and I'm glad to be with you. And I'm your financial advisor, and I'm local. I'm here in Owings Mills, Maryland, and my phone number is 410 902 0464. If you've been thinking about calling, today's the day. So give me a call, 410 902 0464. Remember that at this moment in time, we have a wonderful program. If you're 65 years old, we can get you 7.5%. 7.5% for life. 7.5%. So in other words, $7,500 on 100,000, and that will be the same amount you'll get for the rest of your life and the rest of your spouse's life. So you want to think about that. You want to learn more about it. All you got to do is call me. Again, Mike Newmeyer, 410 902 0464. So this is the first thing I want to tell you. And remember, this is an educational program in addition to obviously introducing us to the community as far as our services. So I've been following my regular seminar, and today I want to start out by reviewing what I think is a very, very important topic because I get questions about it. Seemingly, as many times as we talk about it, we still get a lot of questions. That's Social Security, okay? Now, people say, I had a fellow say to me yesterday, well, I feel it's been a good day. I said, well, why is that? I'm glad to hear it. He said, I got my Social Security check. I said, well, that's good. I said, he said, but I don't know if I'll ever get another one. I said, why wouldn't you get another one? He says, I don't know. Everything is changing so fast. I'm not sure there's going to be any Social Security. And that's not the first time I've heard that. I want you to think about a couple of things, first of all. Everybody in Congress wants to get reelected. Even if the Social Security fund was completely empty, they would find a way to pay Social Security. And those people in Congress, they've got families. And those families are depending on Social Security too. They've got their communities. They've got everybody they represent back in their congressional districts and their senatorial districts. Those states, they have to answer to those people, and they'll never get reelected if they let something like that go. That is the most important entitlement program that we have. And Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all of those, they are the largest part of the budget. They're the largest part of the budget. They're the biggest part of our national budget. So yes, that's a big number. Now, with the reforms that are taking place, and they'll say, oh, they're taking it away. They're not taking anything away. It's not going to go away. It is my business to keep up with numbers and money and all of the legislation and all the activity that relates to those things. That's my job, okay, to take care of my clients and to understand the impact of legislation that's taking place. There's nothing that's happening that's going to ever allow those benefits to go away. No way. Not a chance. Mistakes have always been made. It's always true. But the big problem in those entitlements programs are the fraud. So if I'm talking to a fraudster, yeah, you'll probably lose out. And the people that are 150 years old that are getting Social Security, or getting refunds on their taxes, or collecting Medicaid or Medicare, well, yeah, those folks, they're not going to get anything anymore because that's fraud. And do you know that Medicare alone has an investigative group inside of Medicare and another group outside of Medicare, okay, trying to stop the fraud. And even with all that effort, there's a huge amount of fraud going on. So if we can clean some of those things up, if we could get half of that taken care of, we would never have to ever think about whether or not these, entitlement programs were going to be funded. And they're going to be funded anyway. But the main thing is we've got to also reduce inflation. Because when you get that money from Social Security, if it's not buying the things you need it to buy, your basic essentials, then that's because of inflation. If we can reduce the amount of money that the federal government is paying out in any regard, totally, if we can stop working on deficit financing, that is to say, borrowing money, writing money and printing money and borrowing money and borrowing more than we're bringing in, more than the gross domestic product, and then that money goes back into the economy. That's supply and demand. If you've got more, supply than you have demand, it goes one way. If you have more demand than you have supply, then it goes another way. But the point is, we want to end inflation. Currently, for the last several months, we're down a little over 1% in inflation. You know what inflation was before. But the other problem is, yes, inflation can stop, but what happens if the prices that we're buying it at now don't go down? You could have inflation stop, but your prices could stay high, because we're saying it's not growing at the rate that it was, but it's still, where it is today. And that's a result of a lot of inflation for the last several years. So we have a big job ahead of us, big job. And that's what the tariffs are about. That's what all this activity is about. And the people that are skeptical about those things, I always say to them, well, what would you do? What would you do? It's amazing the look on their faces when I ask that questions. I ask that questions of local politicians. I ask that question of business people. I ask that questions of you and me walking up and down the street. I ask those questions. I never get answers. What would you do? What would you do? There's a lot of skepticism, but there's also a lot of support for these things. We got to turn the situation around. We got to manufacture here in the United States. We have to have that money come back into our country, and so we can take care of ourselves. That's what it's about. We have to take care of ourselves, and I'm all for all of that. Okay, but so Social Security, I'm not worried about Social Security, not even a little bit. That's what I tell people. I'm not worried about it. I want to see to increase as needed. We need cost of living adjustments. Hopefully, the cost of living is not going to be going up like it has been with inflation, but we need to have adjustments from time to time, just like minimum wage needs to be adjusted. Okay, you're never going to overcome inflation 100%. For 40 years, inflation ran at about 4%. Now, of course, you know what's happened in the last several years. So we've got to get it manageable. We've got to get it down. And that's a bipartisan need. It's not political. It really is the American people. We are the American people, and we do not need to have inflation. Okay, so that's a little bit about Social Security. Now, if you want to know what your benefits are going to be, if you want to get a picture of your own personal situation, you can go to ss.gov and you can find out what's available to you. You can open a little account there, in other words, where they can figure out your Social Security, if you take it at different ages and so forth and so on. What's the consequence if you take it early or if you wait, and on and on and on and on. I will tell you this commonsensical thing. If you're really going to stop working at 62, my advice is start taking your income, take your Social Security. And if you're going to stop working at, say, 65, but you haven't reached your optimum situation, if you're going to stop working and you need the income, start it then. Otherwise, you're never going to make up the differences. For instance, if you look at 62, if you were going to get X number of dollars, and you look at 67 and a half, your actual, let's say that's your actual full benefit age. Okay, when that happens, then if you give up 48 checks, if you give up 48 months, or whatever number, then multiply that times the money you would have gotten, and that's how much money, if it was $1,000, it'd be $48,000. It'll take you about 9 years to make it up, and we don't know how long we're going to live. So that's the kind of commonsensical look at it. What if you need the money and you start taking it and then you don't need it? You can stop it. You could actually reverse it and send the money back if you wanted to, and wait till your full benefit, dollars were available, or at any point thereafter, or you can stop taking the income. So there's a lot of different possibilities, and those are the things you can actually learn if you open an account at Social Security online, ss.gov. Take a look at it. It's not complicated. You can get the answers there. So that's a little bit. I'm not going to get into it any deeper than that. There's so many details in Social Security. What do you do if your spouse dies? How do you, whose Social Security you take? What happens if you get divorced? There's just a lot of different kinds of questions. What about dependents? And so forth and so on. So you need to really get into it by looking at ss.gov. You can make a list of questions after you do that if you want to, go down to the local Social Security office and try to talk to the person that's got the most experience, typically the oldest person there, if you can. That because they have the most experience, then they'll be able to give you better answers. My advice to you on calling Social Security is, if you can ever get through to an individual, you're going to get an answer. But you could call back a week later and get a different answer. It's kind of like calling the IRS. You don't know then which answer is correct. So either do it online or go down, or both, and go down and talk to somebody in person and that you have confidence in and you believe they're telling you what's up. Okay, so those are some ideas. Okay, so that's Social Security. Any questions? Use the process. Online, go visit the people, look for the most experienced. You can rely on their answers. That's a good thing. Now, if you're not going to start social immediately, you may want to look at it again. You may find out that the answers are different because the rules do change from time to time. So you want to know what the most current information is, because that's what's going to affect you probably. The closer you get to it, the more important it is. So, you can look at it now and you say, well, I'm going to wait 5 years. Then you look at it next year and you say, well, you know what? I'm not going to wait 5. I'm going to wait 4. I'm going to wait 3. I'm going to do it now. Situations change. Okay, so look at the eligibility by years and then so forth. And then you look at it this way. The Social Security benefits are based on the 40 best quarters of income. Okay, general rule. Okay, so you can think about that, kind of weigh it against what they're telling you online, weigh it against what you're hearing at the office and so forth and so on. It'll be about right. And so that's kind of how you can figure out. We do a lot more detail in the seminar, exactly, because we get together for 3 or 4 hours, for 3 or 4 weeks, and we talk about all these topics. And lots of people ask a lot of questions. You need to learn from what other people ask and so forth and so on. All right, so those are the basics that you ought to be aware of. And okay, so let me see what else here and along those lines that I want to share with you. Again, I talked about the future of Social Security. Now, if for instance, the only change I can see in Social Security, and this has been done before, they could start the eligibility age later because of aging population. We got people that are going to be born tomorrow that are going to live a lot longer than we are. So obviously they're going to work longer. And obviously they're not going to be able to start Social Security at the same age as that we are. So those rules for the future will definitely have to change. They just have to change because they're going to receive Social Security probably for a lot longer because they'll live a lot longer. Longevity is there and it's increasing. And aging population is at the same time. So what's happening now is that people that are our ages are going to need the social. We're not going to wait till we're 100 years old to start taking Social Security or 88 years old, because we're not going to live as long as those people are. So that's a changing situation in that sense, and that's changed before. When a life expectancy was 50 years old, when it was 60 years old, when it was 70 years old, and so forth, obviously changes had to be made. And now as it moves towards 80 and 90 and so on, it's going to change again. Okay, so that's and what about employer-sponsored retirement plans like 403Bs and 401Ks? Or 957s and so forth. These are all for basically different groups. Okay, 403Bs, you see a lot of that with teachers. 957s, state government employees. TSPs, federal government employees. Now, how do they differ? Not that much, really. Now, there are some basic differences, like with the fire departments and some locales will have a drop account where they'll receive a drop amount of money, which has to go into an IRA that they get besides their Social Security. And in some places, some government, well, you get pensions, for instance. If you're in the Army, you get a pension, but you also get the Social Security. So it's a couple, like a double dipper. Okay, and I'm glad to see first responders like that, getting a benefit. They ought to, huh? They risk their lives for us, and so forth and so on. Okay, so then you look at the others, and what about pensions? Not that many around anymore. As far as employees working for private companies, not that many anymore. Sad. Goes back to 1977 when the 401ks, when the ERISA law was passed, which created the 401ks. Okay, pensions started to go away. Pensions started to go away because basically Wall Street wanted to have that money in the market. And that's why 401ks basically got there. The ERISA law, they passed the ERISA law after a lot of lobbying by Wall Street because they want that money in the market. Was that a good idea? I don't know about all that. I'm not so sure. For some people, it turned out to be a great idea. And some other people didn't do so well, because the market goes up and down. And then when is it you're going to retire? We talk about the event horizon. So let's say you're going to retire in 5 years or 10 years or whenever it was, then obviously between now and then what happens in the market is going to affect your income. It's going to affect how much money you can roll over, into some kind of a retirement plan of income, because income becomes the big deal. Income and expenses are the two big factors in retirement. So, so pensions, well, how do you know a pension is going to survive? Well, if it's with a corporation, there is a thing called the Pension Benefit Guarantee Association, and every company that has a pension has got to contribute to that. Okay, so it's like an insurance company. They're basically going to stand up for any pension that happens to fail. If suddenly you can't get your pension because the company doesn't have the money, then all of a sudden they're going to step in and they're going to guarantee your pension. So the Pension Benefit Guarantee Association, very important that it exists. What about government pensions? Well, they got the taxing ability, and they got the ability to create money. So it may not be that good, obviously, in a bad economy, but they're pretty much on the hook. So if you got a federal pension, you're going to get the money. If you have a pension, with any other city, county, whatever, I've never heard of those actually failing. Well, I'm sure there's been some municipalities during the years that have failed, but I can't think of one. So if you're working in the public, for the public, then basically you're pretty safe with your pensions. But all of them have to have a thing called a COLA, cost of living adjustment, to be that worthwhile. If they don't have a COLA because they don't anticipate enough tax money coming in, that sort of thing can happen. But most pensions that are public pensions do have COLAs, okay, and they've been campaigned for and requested, and a lot of pressure has been there for a long time that the COLAs are there. But the COLAs can be changed. The COLAs all depend on anticipated revenues. So if the revenues don't look that great, then the COLAs may be in trouble. So you need to know, we get COLAs even in Social Security, don't we? We don't call them COLAs, but we get increases, and they're based on cost of living. They're based on, on inflation. It's nice to get those, of course, but keep in mind that indicates that you've got inflation in the marketplace that's taking place. Okay, so the upside and the downside, we'll always take them, won't we? But the reality is that maybe because of inflation. But anyway, so that's the pension situation. And then let's see, defined contribution plans. Now that's your 401k, your TSPs, the 403bs, and so forth. How much can I put into a plan? Is there a finite amount of dollars that I can put into a 401k? Yes, it varies. It's changed. I can remember when the limit was 15,000. I can remember when the limit was 18 and 20 and so forth. So it's always based on what is allowed now. And your employer can tell you, what is allowed and how much the match is. What's a match? That's how much you've got to put in order to get a match, a contribution from the employer. Not everybody has a match. Not every company has a match. Some have it and take it away, and some have are starting up now. So a match is important for employees to know. when they go to work for a company, they want to know those details. It isn't just getting that job, but knowing what the benefits are. Of course, if you need a job and you really need a job, you're going to take the job regardless of what those benefits are, if that's the best you can do. Now, there's other benefits, obviously, health benefits that are very, very important, especially with the rising healthcare costs, that we hope to curtail, that we hope we can actually get under control. And there's a lot of efforts being made to do that very thing, to reduce the cost of medicines in prescriptions and so forth and so on. So we have the developing things like telemarketing, but telemedical, where they actually sit and we're doing like FaceTime, talking to a doctor or a professional and getting help without going into a facility to visit. So, there's all kinds of things happening to reduce the cost, but believe me, it's going to keep going up anyway. It's going to keep going up anyway. So more competition, for medicines, the cost of developing new medicines and so forth is the reason that medicines are as expensive as they are. And a lot of factors that are not all that admirable. But anyway, so those are some ideas that you may want to think about. So the plan you got at work, you want to talk to your HR department, find out what the max is. Obviously, the more you put into it, the less taxes you're going to pay, because that's going to be deducted from your gross income for tax reasons. So if you can afford to put more in, if a couple is able to do it, one person can do it, the other person doesn't do it, and so forth and so on. If you don't need the money now, a good place to put it. And as long as the market performs, what do you do if the market's not so hot? What do you do if you don't trust the market? Look at the choices in the plans. Look at how you can allocate the money. Look at the fixed side. What are they offering you on the fixed side? Does the fixed percentage, does it compete with outside the plans, what you get at the bank and so forth? Remember, what you put into this is tax deferred. So if you're getting 4% tax deferred and you could have gotten 5% outside, well, you're probably better off putting it in the fixed inside your plan. And what if you get a lot of anxiety about the market? Well, there's another reason to do it. But keep this in mind: if you use a money market, a fixed money market account, you're paying a fee. If you just take a straight fixed account, there's not a fee for putting it in there, but there is a fee for a fixed mutual fund. Okay, so just be careful about what you're doing, because there's a lot of money market accounts that are fee based. So you've got a fee built in, and that isn't as desirable as the non-fixed, unless you think you can make more money in it and you're willing to take the risk. But I always say, if you're willing to take that risk, then why not look at some low fee regular mutual funds, and they're out there too. So, know what you're getting into. Know that you've got diversification. Get some advice. If there's a plan in place, theoretically, they're going to provide you with an advisor at least once a year. And you can learn anyway. Look at Morningstar and some other sources and look at the funds that are available to you in your plan. And look for what's low, volatility or low risk, and what's high risk and what's mid risk, so forth. So depending on how conservative you are, you can build a portfolio in such a way that you're matching up to your level of market risk that you want. Okay. And the other thing is, the younger you are, the more risk you can tolerate. Okay. But the older you are, as you get closer to retirement, you're going to want less risk, because you want the money to be there when you're ready to retire. So you're moving in that direction. You're putting things in lower and lower and lower risk as you move through the process of those years. So those are some of the basics you want to think about. And incidentally, the funds that are inside of a plan are basically a low fee. In other words, you'll get advisory A funds or whatever, where you have the lowest possible fee that you can get in an A fund, which is typically the lowest fee anyway. And so you want to do that. Essentially, what you've got is money under management in a 401k. That's really the way it works. So you want to keep some of those things in mind. I want to remind you that we help people. You know, our basic thrust is to help you. You can tell by the fact that we do education on these shows. You know, our basic thrust is to help people. That's what I do. If you come and see me, I will try to help you. If you have questions, absolutely try to help you. I want to remind you that, you know, I've got this plan that'll pay you 7.5% if you're 65, and it's a very generous plan, and I love to show it to you. You can do rollovers into it from your work plan. You can do rollovers from IRAs. You can put money into it that's not in an IRA, that's just in savings, and let the money grow tax deferred. That's a very important thing. Tax deferral is very important. I got to end the show, so I want to remind you to call me and let me help you. 410-902-0464. God bless you. I look forward to seeing you next time.